I have to admit, when I first looked at the stack of research for today's deep dive, I was expecting the usual suspects.
Hmm.
We're talking about the future of Christian missions, so I figured, okay, a list of hurdles, secularism, maybe some geopolitical barriers, or, the classic lack of funding argument.
It's standard lugs, isn't it? If you polled 100 church leaders, those are probably the obstacles they would name.
Exactly. But this material throws a massive curveball right in the introduction. It argues that the single greatest threat to the future of Christian mission isn't any of those external things.
Right.
It isn't persecution, it isn't money, it's actually delay.
It is a provocative premise.
Yeah.
But when you really dig into the data they're presenting, it starts to make an uncomfortable amount of sense.
So we're diving into this collection of materials on cultivating a missional mindset early.
And that's the core argument, really. It's a critique of our timing.
Right, this whole idea that we tend to treat mission like it's a graduate level elective.
Yeah.
Something you get into only after you've mastered the basics, or maybe it's just for the special forces of the faith.
Precisely. The sources argue that if the church waits until adulthood, until someone is, say, 25, finished with university, settled into a career, if you wait until then to introduce this concept of participating in God's global work, it's simply too late.
Okay, too late in what sense? Is it just that they're too busy with jobs and mortgages, or is this something deeper?
It's cognitive and it's developmental. The research suggests that by the time a student reaches adulthood, their fundamental assumptions about identity, culture, the other.
People unlike themselves.
Yeah. Those assumptions are already calcified.
Yeah.
If the church hasn't been doing the forming during those key developmental years, well, other forces have.
And those forces are pretty relentless. We're talking social media algorithms, nationalism, consumerism.
Right. And these aren't neutral forces. They are actively discipling young people every single day. They teach students to view the world as, a marketplace where you consume or a battlefield where you compete.
So the mission of this deep dive is to unpack the alternative. How do we shift that timeline?
Exactly. We're looking at moving away from just recruiting missionaries later in life to forming disciples right now who instinctively see the world the way God sees it.
And this isn't just about getting more kids to sign up for summer trips. The sources make a really interesting distinction here between mission as activity and mission as imagination.
That's crucial.
I think so, because usually when we say mission, we immediately jump to logistics. We think plane tickets, vaccinations, digging wells, painting fences.
That is the activity trap. And to be clear, the texts aren't saying those activities are wrong.
Of course not.
But they argue they're the fruit, not the root. If you focus only on the activity, you often end up with, tourism. The root is mission as imagination. It's a way of perceiving reality before it's a way of doing tasks.
And the bedrock of that imagination, according to these documents, is something they call biblical anthropology. Now, that sounds like a heavy seminary term.
It does, doesn't it?
Break that down for us. Why is anthropology the starting point for a teenager?
It sounds academic, but it's actually incredibly practical. It creates a non-negotiable starting point, the Imago Dei, the image of God.
Okay.
The argument is that before a student learns how to do missions, the strategy, the logistics, the fundraising, they first have to learn who humans are.
Because if you get the who wrong,
Yeah.
the how is going to be a disaster.
Boy, it goes off the rails immediately. I mean, think about it. If a student views people primarily through the lens of their own culture, seeing them as, consumers or competitors,
Yeah.
or worst of all, just problems to solve,
Yeah.
their mission work will inevitably become paternalistic. It becomes transactional. I have the solution, you have the problem. I am the giver, you are the receiver.
That's the classic savior complex. We see this all the time in volunteerism narratives. The hero swooping in.
Exactly. And the Imago Dei just flips that entirely. It teaches students to see every human being, regardless of their poverty, their religion, their location, as a mirror reflecting God's glory.
So when you engage in mission, the posture isn't conquest.
No. You aren't trying to bring God to a godless place. The posture is reverence.
That's a powerful distinction. You aren't going there to give these people dignity.
No, you are going there to recognize the dignity God has already bestowed upon them. You are witnessing what God is already doing.
It seems like that shift from hero to witness would fundamentally change how a young person handles the stress of mission work, too.
Oh, absolutely.
If it's not all up to you to save someone, that's a lot of pressure off your shoulders.
It anchors the work in theology rather than ego. But the challenge, and the sources are very honest about this, is that our current systems just aren't built to teach this. In most settings, missions is a silo.
Right. You have your math class, your history class, your regular Bible study, and then maybe once a year you have Mission Week.
It's a side dish.
Exactly.
And that compartmentalization is deadly. It signals to students that mission is optional, or it's a hobby for the super spiritual kids. The vision presented here is theology without silos. It's about integrated learning.
Okay, I'd love to get concrete with this. Because it sounds great to say integrate mission into everything, but what does that actually look like in a history class or a science lab?
Well, take history. Usually we teach dates, battles, the rise and fall of empires. The missional mindset approach flips the lens.
How so?
You view history through the lens of human dignity and redemption. You start asking questions like, how did this empire honor or violate the image of God? Where were the voices of the marginalized in this era?
So you're training them to spot the Imago Dei or the abuse of it in the past so they can spot it in the present.
Exactly. And in literature, you aren't just reading for plot. You're reading to discern human longing. What are the deep, universal questions this culture is asking through its stories?
Yeah.
What are they grieving?
It teaches a student to listen to a culture's heart before they try to speak to it.
That's it.
And science. That feels like the hardest bridge to build. How do you make biology missional?
The sources actually lean into science heavily. It's about viewing biology or ecology through the lens of stewardship. It's teaching students that their future vocation, whether they become a doctor, an engineer, an architect, is the vehicle for mission.
So mission is something you do after you clock out of your secular job.
The job is the stewardship of God's creation.
That reframes the whole sacred versus secular divide that confuses so many people. Now, there was one section in the material about curriculum that I thought was pretty bold, maybe even controversial for some listeners, the section on world religions.
Yes, the call for missional literacy.
Right. Because typically in many Christian circles, there is a hesitation there, a fear that if we teach young people too much about other religions, they'll get confused.
Or that it will dilute their own faith.
Yeah, but this text argues for missional literacy versus fear-based avoidance.
And this is a crucial point in the document. They point directly to the Apostle Paul at the Areopagus in Acts 17. It's the classic model. When Paul was in Athens, surrounded by idols, he didn't start by condemning them. He didn't plug his ears. He observed. He listened. He engaged with their existing framework, their unknown God.
He even quoted their own poets. He knew their culture better than they expected him to.
He did. And the source argues this approach does three things for students. First, it actually clarifies Christian distinctiveness.
Okay.
You understand your own faith better when you contrast it with another system. Second, it cultivates humility. And third, it builds relational bridges. You can't love your neighbor if you don't understand their worldview.
There is a specific example about Hinduism that really landed for me. It broke down how you can compare concepts without being disrespectful.
The comparison of dharma and karma with grace.
Yes, exactly.
It's a great example of that contrast leading to clarity. When a student really wrestles with the concept of karma, strict cause and effect, you get what you earn. And then contrast that with the radical, unfair, unearned nature of Christian grace. They don't lose their faith. Their understanding of grace gets sharper. It just pops into high definition.
And practically, it means they can talk to a Hindu neighbor with respect and intelligence, rather than just defensiveness.
Which brings us to the neighbor aspect. We have to talk about the elephant in the room regarding youth missions. The mission trip.
The sacred cow of the youth group experience, the matching T-shirts, the van ride, the whole thing.
Indeed. And the source material is, let's say, gently ruthless in its critique of how these are often done.
It uses the term mission tourism. That stings a little.
It does. It describes the trend where the primary goal of the trip, whether we admit it or not, is an emotional high for the students or a photo op. We go, we consume an experience, feel good about ourselves, and we leave.
So the text calls for a radical shift from tourism to formation.
And that shift seems to hinge on what they call the theology of presence. And they break this down, pre-trip, during, and post-trip. And they argue that the pre-trip is where most groups fail before they even leave the airport.
This goes back to literacy, right?
It does. The source argues for deep cultural and historical literacy before you buy a plane ticket. You shouldn't land in a country knowing nothing about its colonial history, its economic struggles, or its religious landscape.
It's a respect issue. If I don't know your story, I can't really respect you. I'm just visiting a backdrop.
Exactly. If you don't know the history, you are just a tourist looking at scenery. And then During the trip, the shift is from doing for to being with. It's less about building a wall, which, let's be honest, the locals could probably build better and faster themselves, and more about relationships. It's about sitting, listening, and learning.
I think that's the hardest part for Americans especially. We are so task-oriented. We want to point to the painted fence and say, I did that. Being with feels inefficient.
It feels inefficient, but it's relational. And then comes the post-trip debrief. The sources argue this is the most critical phase for long-term impact.
They called this local global continuity.
Right. If a student comes back from a trip and says, I have a burden for poverty in this country, but then ignores the homeless person across the street from their high school,
The formation failed.
it failed. The trip was just a fantasy camp. The goal is to bring that missionized perspective back home.
Now, obviously, not everyone can travel. Expenses are real. But the material brought up a fascinating section on virtual storytelling.
This is a modern tool for formation that didn't exist 20 years ago. The quote that stood out to me from the text was, "Story forms the imagination before strategy shapes the hands."
I like that.
Before a student can physically go, they need to imaginatively go. Virtual reality, immersive video, curated documentaries, these can humanize unreached people.
It moves them from being just statistics on a prayer card to having names and faces.
Yes, but there's a strong ethical caution here too.
What's that?
The source warns against pottery porn or exoticizing culture. If the only stories we tell young people about the developing world are stories of starvation and helplessness, we strip those people of their agency.
It reinforces that savior complex we talked about earlier.
Exactly. It makes us feel superior. The stories need to highlight resilience, faith, and local leadership. We need to see how they are the heroes of their own stories.
So let's zoom out a bit. We have theological foundation, the classroom integration, the reform trip philosophy. But how is this actually caught? The source talks a lot about mentorship being the glue.
Faith is caught, not just taught. That's the mantra here. You can have the slickest youth program, the best VR headsets, the best curriculum, but if a student doesn't see a living example of a missional life in an adult they trust, it probably won't land.
So it's about intergenerational relationships over programs.
Absolutely. And they bring up some heavy hitters from history to prove this works. Hudson Taylor, specifically.
Right, the China Inland Mission.
They use an apprenticeship model.
Hmm.
Young missionaries didn't just get a handbook and a map. They lived with veterans. They observed how they prayed, how they handled stress, how they treated the locals.
And crucially, how they adopted the local culture.
Right, the dress, the language. They learned cultural humility by osmosis, not just by lecture.
And they mentioned the Wesleyan revival as well.
The class meetings in 18th century England, these were essentially mentorship circles. It wasn't just about learning doctrine. The question was, how is your soul? And how are you living this out?
And I love how this connects back to that idea of vocation, because most of these students aren't going to be professional missionaries or pastors.
No, they're going to be accountants, graphic designers, plumbers.
And that's where the mentorship is vital. If a student is mentored by a business person who lives missionally, that changes everything.
It creates a safe space to wrestle. A student can ask, how do I deal with ethical dilemmas at work? Or how can I be missional if I'm staring at spreadsheets all day?
It validates the priesthood of all believers. It tells the student, your future desk is your mission field.
Exactly. It dismantles the hierarchy where the real Christians go to seminary and everyone else just writes the checks.
So, bringing this down to the ground level, if you're a leader or a parent listening to this and you buy into this vision, what do you actually do on a Tuesday? What are the rhythms?
The text suggests moving from curiosity to compassion through specific rhythms. One idea is a mission awareness week, but deeper than that is what they call the loop. The cycle is story leads to imagination leads to prayer, and prayer leads to obedience.
Let's focus on that prayer part, because the text distinguishes between prayer as a shopping list and prayer as posture.
This is a key insight. Prayer isn't just asking God to fix things or fund things.
Yeah.
It's a way to align the heart with God's global vision.
Mm.
When a student prays for a specific unreached people group or for the peace of a specific city, something changes in them.
It's forming spiritual muscle memory.
It is. It moves them from a sense of obligation, I have to do this because I'm a Christian, to expectancy.
Yeah.
They start waiting to see how God will move.
And that ties back to the delay issue we started with.
It does.
If it's established these rhythms, early story, imagination, prayer, obedience, it becomes their native language.
They don't have to learn missions at age 30. It's just who they are. It's their operating system.
So, to summarize what we've uncovered, the sources are telling us that mission isn't fundamentally about geography. It's not about crossing an ocean.
No. It's about anthropology, how we see people, and imagination, how we see God at work.
It's about forming a generation that instinctively asks, where is God at work here? Whether they are in a market in Southeast Asia or in their high school cafeteria.
That is the goal.
And that leads us to the final provocation from the source material, which I think is just brilliant. We often ask, how do we get young people interested in missions?
We do. We treat it like a sales pitch.
Yeah.
But the better question, the one that should keep us up at night, is how do we raise young people who cannot imagine their faith apart from God's mission?
That's the shift. Not a department of the church, but the DNA of the faith. Thank you for listening to this deep dive into cultivating a missional mindset. We hope it sparks some imagination in you.
Until next time.